She sucked scorpion poison from an Apache boy's wound. A week later, his father offered her his hand. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The air was dry and thick with dust as the sun beat relentlessly over the arid landscape of the southwestern desert. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and warm earth, swirling in gusts that barely provided any relief from the oppressive heat. The midday sun cast long shadows, but even the shade was no escape from the suffocating warmth that seemed to come from the very ground itself. Abigail Hawthorne had been walking for hours, her feet sore and blistered from the unforgiving terrain. She had left her homestead in search of supplies, but now, with the sun high above, she realized she had ventured too far. The landscape around her was unfamiliar, vast and barren, with nothing but rolling hills and the occasional cactus dotting the horizon. As she trudged on, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a faint rustling. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but as she turned toward the sound, her eyes widened in shock. There, lying in the dirt, was a young boy, his body twisted in agony. He was barely conscious, his face pale and drenched in sweat. His clothes were torn and stained with blood, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle. At first, she thought he was dead, but as she knelt beside him, she could see his chest rise and fall, shallow and weak. The boy's eyes flickered open, and he let out a weak groan. Abigail's heart raced as she scanned the area, searching for any sign of the people who might have left him here. There was no sign of a camp or any other travelers, just the empty, harsh landscape. Her instincts kicked in. She had to help him. She gently cradled his head in her lap, trying to calm him, but he winced in pain as he attempted to move. She noticed something glimmering on the ground near his hand. A small scorpion, its stinger still raised. Her stomach lurched as she realized what had happened. The boy had been stung. The poison was already spreading through his system, and if she didn't act quickly, he wouldn't survive. Without hesitation, Abigail placed her lips against the boy's wound, sucking the poison from the area, her breath shallow with the weight of the decision. It was a desperate move, but she knew it was her only chance to save him. After what seemed like an eternity, the boy's breathing steadied, and his eyes slowly closed in exhaustion. She carefully laid him down, wiping the sweat from her brow, her mind racing with the gravity of what she had just done. She had saved his life, at least for now, but she had no idea who he was or why he had been left to die in the desert. Abigail glanced around again, her nerves on edge. She could sense the presence of someone watching her, but she saw no one. The silence of the desert was deafening, and as the shadows lengthened, she made a decision. She would carry him to her homestead and care for him there. Little did she know, the boy she had saved was no ordinary child. He was the son of a powerful Apache chief, and his rescue would set into motion a chain of events that would change Abigail's life forever. The evening sun began to set, casting a fiery glow over the landscape, as Abigail carefully lifted the boy into her arms, determined to get him back to safety. But the night ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, and Abigail's fate was now tied to the boy in ways she could never have imagined. The sun had set by the time Abigail reached her homestead, the boy's weight growing heavier with each step. She had carried him for miles, the dry desert air now cooler but still unforgiving. As she approached the familiar side of her cabin, she felt a strange sense of urgency, a need to get him inside and away from the dangers that still lurked outside. She pushed through the door, her breath quick and shallow, and gently laid him down on the bed she had prepared earlier that day. The boy's body was still cold, his face pale from the poison, but his breathing had steadied. Abigail quickly set to work, washing his wounds and wrapping his arm. She could hear the faint sound of coyotes in the distance, their howls echoing through the empty night. She had always felt alone in the desert, but now, with this boy in her care, the isolation seemed to press down on her more than ever. It wasn't long before she noticed the soft creaking of the door. Abigail froze, her hand on the cloth she had been using to clean his wound. She hadn't heard anyone approach. Slowly, she turned, and her heart skipped a beat. Standing in the doorway was a tall figure, dressed in dark clothing with an aura of quiet authority. He looked at her with a piercing gaze, his face partially obscured by a scarf and wide-brimmed hat. The man's presence filled the room, his stature intimidating yet oddly calm. She didn't know whether to be afraid or relieved. His voice broke the silence, deep and steady. "You saved my son," he said, his accent thick and deliberate. "Why?" Abigail swallowed hard, stepping back from the boy's side as she slowly wiped her hands on her apron. "He was dying," she said simply, trying to keep her voice steady. "I couldn't let him die, no matter who he was." The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he stepped inside, his boots scraping against the wooden floor. His eyes never left her face. "You do not know who I am, do you?" he asked. Abigail shook her head, still unsure of whether she should be reaching for her rifle or offering him a cup of water. "I am Chief Kale of the Apache," he said. "And that boy you saved, he is my son, Arik. He is of the Penitika tribe." Abigail's eyes widened in realization. She had heard stories of the Apache, of their fierce warriors and complex culture. She had known the dangers of living so close to their land, but she had never expected to come face to face with one. "I didn't know," she said softly, her mind racing. "I just saw a boy in need, and I couldn't leave him to die." Chief Kale nodded slowly, his face softening. "You are brave. Not many would risk their lives to save one of my people, and even fewer would do so without fear of what might come after." Abigail couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. The Apache had always been painted as enemies, their raids on settlers' homes infamous in these parts. And yet, here she was, with their chief standing in her home, thanking her for saving his son. Chief Kale stepped forward and knelt beside his son, his hand resting gently on the boy's forehead. He spoke softly in his native tongue, the words like a low hum in the room. Abigail watched in silence, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had saved this boy's life, but what now? Would the Apache see her as an ally? Or would they come for her, demanding something in return? Chief Kale turned back to her, his eyes meeting hers once more. "You have saved my son," he said, his voice firm but with a note of gratitude. "And for that, you have earned something few outsiders receive, my protection." Abigail felt a shiver run down her spine. She had heard of the power that came with such a promise, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what it meant. "Protection?" she asked cautiously. "What does that mean?" Kale stood slowly, towering over her. "It means you will be safe from any who would threaten you. And in return, you will owe no debt but one, to protect my people, as you have protected my son." Abigail wasn't sure what to make of his words. She had expected a simple thank you, not an oath of protection that tied her to a world she had never known. But as she looked at the boy lying on the bed, his life still hanging in the balance, she realized that this was more than just a gesture of gratitude. It was a bond, one that would change the course of her life forever. Kale placed his hand on her shoulder, his grip surprisingly gentle for someone of his stature. "You have chosen a path of honor, Abigail Hawthorne," he said, "and now you must walk it, with us." Abigail nodded slowly, her mind still trying to process everything that had just happened. She had saved a life, but in doing so, she had become part of something much larger than herself. A week ago, she had been a lonely widow, struggling to make a life in the harsh desert. Now, she had a new purpose, and her future was uncertain. But one thing was clear, she would never be the same again. Abigail woke the next morning to the soft light of dawn creeping through the cracks of the cabin's wooden walls. She sat up slowly, her muscles aching from the exertion of the previous day. The desert was still as the morning fog hung low in the valley outside, but a quiet storm seemed to brew inside her as she reflected on the events of the past few days. Chief Kale's words echoed in her mind. Protection. A bond. She hadn't asked for any of this. Her quiet life, marked by solitude and small struggles, had been upended by the life of a boy she had saved from certain death. The boy, Arik, still slept soundly on the bed across from her, his fever gone and his breathing even, though his face was still drawn with exhaustion. She moved to check on him, instinctively feeling the warmth of his skin, and was relieved to find his fever had broken. The poison was no longer a threat, but the boy's wounds needed tending to. and she knew she couldn't rest until they were properly healed. As she worked, her thoughts wandered to the promise Kale had made: protection. The words had felt like a blessing in the moment, but as the silence of the morning stretched on, she began to feel the weight of what it might mean. A week ago, she had been a simple widow, eking out a solitary existence in the desert. Now, she was tied to a tribe, to a chief who had given her his word, and to a boy who had unknowingly dragged her into a world she had never known. The door creaked, and Abigail turned to see Kale standing in the doorway. His presence was as imposing as it was serene, his dark eyes observing her without judgment. He stepped inside, his movements deliberate, yet not threatening. He paused, looking at Arik before speaking, his voice as calm as ever. "He will recover," Kale said, his gaze lingering on the boy. "You have done what even my best healers could not." Abigail met his gaze, still unsure of how to respond to his quiet admiration. "He is a child," she said softly. "I couldn't just leave him there." Kale nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "That is what makes you different from most. You do not see enemies, only people who need help." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Abigail couldn't tell if he was praising her or simply stating a fact. "I didn't save him because of who he is," she replied, her voice steady. "I saved him because no one should die alone in the desert." Kale studied her for a moment longer before speaking again, his voice low but firm. "You have shown the strength of a warrior, Abigail, not through violence, but through compassion. And for that, my people will honor you." She wasn't sure how to respond to that. Honor. She was a woman who had never known anything beyond her own survival. "I'm no warrior," she said quietly, shaking her head. "I just did what anyone would have done." Kale's eyes softened. "Perhaps. But in this world, doing what is right is more rare than you think." He stepped closer, and Abigail's breath caught in her throat. She had spent most of her life avoiding confrontation, hiding in the shadows of her own small world. Now, she was being pulled into something larger, something she didn't fully understand. She took a step back, her heart racing. "What are you asking of me, Kale?" The chief paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "You have saved my son. You have earned a place among us. I offer you the protection of my tribe. And in return, I ask for nothing more than loyalty." Abigail's mind spun. Loyalty? To whom? To him? To the Apache? She had spent her life trying to avoid such commitments, avoiding being tied to anything that might bring her harm. And yet, she couldn't deny the strange pull she felt toward him, toward them. "I don't know if I can make such a promise," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure what loyalty means in this world anymore." Kale's expression was unreadable as he studied her, but there was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet understanding. "Then make no promises, Abigail," he said after a long pause. "But know this, I will keep my word to you, as long as you keep yours to my son. Protect him, as you have protected him already." She nodded, her heart heavy. This was more than she had ever expected, more than she had ever wanted. But she had already stepped into a world that was no longer her own. A world where compassion was as powerful as the sword, where loyalty was a bond forged not in blood, but in trust. And as she looked at Arik, now beginning to stir on the bed, she knew that her life had changed forever. There was no turning back now. The days that followed were a blur of quiet activity, each one stretching into the next, as Abigail settled into a rhythm she had never known before. Chief Kale's offer of protection was not a light one. He had given her a place in his tribe, but with it came responsibility, a promise to protect Arik, the young boy she had saved. As the week passed, she kept her distance from the rest of the Apache, still unsure of how to fully integrate into their world. Despite her hesitations, the bond between her and Arik grew. The boy, who had once been on the brink of death, now seemed to flourish under her care. He was no longer a mere stranger, but someone whose life she had intertwined with her own. Abigail found herself waking early to prepare food, checking on the boy's progress, and tending to the small chores that filled her days. The isolation of the desert that had once weighed so heavily on her now felt strangely comforting. Yet, there was an underlying tension she could not shake. Chief Kale's quiet presence had become a constant reminder of the new life she had found, one she had not sought but had been thrust into. As she worked one morning, cutting herbs from her small garden, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Kale's presence was unmistakable, steady, and commanding. "You have done well," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "Arik is strong because of you." Abigail wiped her hands on her apron, looking up at him. "He's a good boy," she said, though the words felt hollow. She had no idea what kind of future awaited him, or her. The chief stepped closer, his dark eyes studying her with quiet intensity. "There are those who will want to test your commitment," he said. "The tribe is watching. They will see if you are truly one of us, or if you are just a visitor." Abigail's heart skipped a beat. She had known this would come eventually, the scrutiny of the tribe. She wasn't one of them. She had not earned the right to be. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask to be part of your world." Kale regarded her with a look that seemed to pierce through her defenses. "You did not ask for this, but you have chosen to stay," he said. "You saved my son. That is enough. But the tribe will see your actions. They will judge you by what you do, not what you say." Abigail swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle heavily on her shoulders. She had not come here to fight or to prove anything. She had come to survive, to live out her days in peace. But now, peace seemed as distant as ever. That afternoon, as she sat by the fire, preparing a meal, she was interrupted by the sound of voices approaching. It was a group of Apache warriors, their faces stern and unreadable. They moved in silence, their eyes scanning the area before they finally came to a stop in front of her. One of them, an older man with a scar across his cheek, spoke first. "You are the woman who saved Arik," he said, his voice gruff. Abigail nodded, trying to remain calm. "Yes," she said simply. The warrior did not smile or offer any words of gratitude. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "And you are now under the protection of the chief," he said. "But protection is not without cost." Abigail's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice betraying her uncertainty. The warrior did not answer immediately. He only stared at her, his gaze cold and calculating. "The tribe does not take kindly to outsiders. There are those who believe you should leave. There are those who believe your presence here will bring trouble." Abigail's heart pounded in her chest. She had known the Apache were a proud and protective people, but she hadn't expected open hostility. "I've done nothing but care for the boy," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not here to cause harm." The warrior did not seem convinced. "We will see," he said. "The tribe will decide your fate. But know this, you are a guest here, and guests do not stay forever." With that, he turned and walked away, his warriors following in silence. Abigail stood there, her mind reeling. She had saved Arik's life, but now, she was being judged. She had been given protection, but it was a protection that came with expectations. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the desert, Abigail felt the weight of her decision settle in. She was no longer just a widow in the desert. She was part of something much larger, a world she didn't understand, surrounded by people whose customs and beliefs were as foreign to her as the land they called home. She had chosen to stay, but now she wondered if she had made the right choice. Would the tribe accept her? Or would she become another outsider in a land that didn't have room for those who didn't belong? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as the night descended upon them. Abigail had no answers, only the quiet hope that, somehow, she would find a way to make it work. But deep down, she knew that in this world, survival came at a price, and she was beginning to pay it. Days passed in a blur for Abigail, and the tension she had felt after the warrior's warning lingered in her thoughts. The Apache tribe, led by Chief Kale, had accepted her in some ways, but their judgment had not disappeared. She had been given protection, yes, but it was a protection that seemed more like an unspoken contract, one that required her loyalty, her trust, and her commitment to the people who had taken her in. The tribe was watching her, waiting for her to prove her place among them. Each time she walked through the camp, she felt their eyes on her. Some faces were neutral, some skeptical, but there was one constant. They were watching. It was late one afternoon when Abigail finally decided to leave her cabin and walk into the heart of the camp. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the earth, but the desert heat was still relentless. She had learned to adapt to the rhythms of the tribe, but the weight of the promise she had made, to protect Arik, to stand by Chief Kale, was a constant pressure in her chest. She had kept her distance, unsure of how to fit into a culture so different from her own. But today, something pushed her forward. She couldn't hide forever. As she approached the center of the camp, she saw Kale standing by the fire, talking with several of the warriors. His face was calm, unreadable as usual, but his posture was one of authority. He had always seemed so distant, as though he carried the weight of an entire people on his shoulders. Abigail hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach, but then she remembered her promise. She had made her choice. She stepped forward. When Kale saw her, his expression didn't change. He simply motioned for her to come closer. "You've been avoiding the tribe," he said quietly, his deep voice carrying across the flickering flames. "Why?" Abigail wasn't sure how to answer. She wasn't avoiding them on purpose, but the unease in her chest had kept her at arm's length. "I didn't want to intrude," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I don't belong here, Kale." Kale's eyes softened slightly, though his gaze remained intense. "You belong because you chose to stay. And you saved my son. That is more than most would ever do for us." His words were simple, but they struck Abigail with their weight. She had saved Arik, yes, but she hadn't expected it to lead her here, to this place, this life. "I don't know if I can be what you need," she admitted. "I'm not like you. I don't know your ways." Kale studied her for a long moment, as though weighing her words carefully. "You do not have to be like us to be with us," he said. "You have already proven your worth. But you must understand, the tribe is watching. You will have to earn their respect, as you have earned mine." Abigail nodded slowly, her heart pounding. She had known this day would come. She had known the tribe would not just accept her without question. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, unsure of where to begin. Kale's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Live with us. Help us. Protect those who need protecting. That is all we ask." The simplicity of his answer left her stunned. In many ways, this was more than she had bargained for, more than she had ever expected. But as she looked at the tribe, at the warriors who stood by Kale, she realized that this was not just about survival. It was about trust, about giving herself to something larger than her own fears. "I will do what I can," she said, the words coming easier than she expected. Kale nodded once, his gaze never leaving her face. "That is enough," he said. "In time, you will see that there is no other way." Later that evening, as the stars began to fill the sky, Abigail sat near the fire, her mind racing. She had made a promise, and now she would see it through. She wasn't sure what the future held, or if she truly belonged with the Apache, but she knew one thing for certain. This was her path now. She could not turn back. The flickering flames cast long shadows across the ground, and the desert wind whispered in the distance. But Abigail no longer felt alone. There was something in the air, something that tied her to this place, to this tribe. She had saved Arik, yes, but in doing so, she had found a new purpose. As the fire burned down to embers, she made a silent vow to herself. She would protect them. She would protect Arik. And, in time, she would earn her place among the Apache. The following days felt like a delicate balance between familiarity and the unknown. Abigail found herself settling into a new routine, though one that often felt foreign to her. Chief Kale's promise of protection hung over her like an unspoken contract, and though the tribe had given her space, she could sense the scrutiny in every glance. The warriors, the women, even the children, all watched her with a mix of curiosity and caution. Arik was recovering well, though his quiet nature and reserved demeanor made it difficult for Abigail to truly connect with him. She continued to care for him, but it was clear he was still adjusting to everything around him, as was she. One morning, as Abigail was gathering firewood near the edge of the camp, she heard a rustling in the brush. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She had become accustomed to the quiet of the desert, and any sound out of place sent her into a state of alert. She reached for the knife, strapped to her belt, and moved cautiously toward the noise. As she parted the brush, her heart skipped a beat. There, crouching low in the shadows, was a young Apache boy, not much older than Arik. His dark eyes watched her with intense curiosity, but there was something different about him. He was alone, without the protection of any warrior, and though his clothes were worn, they were meticulously kept. "Who are you?" Abigail asked, her voice steady but wary. The boy did not immediately answer. Instead, he studied her for a moment, his gaze unblinking. Then, In a voice quieter than the desert breeze, he spoke. I am called Tay, he said. I was sent to find you. Abigail furrowed her brow. Sent by whom? By the chief, Tay replied. There is something you must see. Abigail hesitated. She had not been summoned by the chief directly, but she trusted Cale, and if the boy had been sent by him, there had to be a reason. She gave a nod, signaling for him to lead the way. Tay led her through the thick underbrush toward a distant rock formation. The terrain was rugged, but the boy moved swiftly, navigating the land with the ease of someone who had spent his life in it. They reached a narrow canyon, and Tay stopped just before the entrance. He turned to face her, his expression serious. Do not make a sound, he warned. Abigail's curiosity piqued. She followed him deeper into the canyon, the walls rising higher on either side. The sun was nearly hidden by the towering rocks, casting long shadows across the ground. As they reached a bend in the path, the sound of voices reached her ears. Her instincts kicked in, and she slowed her steps, moving cautiously as Tay gestured for her to be quiet. They rounded the corner, and what Abigail saw next made her heart race. A group of Apache warriors were gathered in a circle, speaking in low tones. At first, she couldn't see what they were talking about, but as she focused, she noticed a familiar figure kneeling in the center of the group. It was Chief Cale. He was not alone. Standing beside him was a woman, her face veiled but her posture unmistakably powerful. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen this woman before, but there was something about her that felt otherworldly, as if she was a part of the land itself. Who is she? Abigail whispered, her voice barely audible. Tay's eyes flickered toward the woman. She is the one who has come to test you, he replied, his tone heavy with meaning. She is the keeper of the ancient ways. The words made no sense to Abigail. Test her? Keeper of the ancient ways? She had not expected any more trials, and the thought of facing something she didn't understand filled her with unease. As the warriors continued to converse, the woman stepped forward, her movements fluid and purposeful. Chief Cale rose to his feet, and for the first time, he looked directly at Abigail, his eyes filled with something that might have been regret, or perhaps something more serious. It is time, Cale said, his voice carrying across the canyon. Abigail Hawthorne, you are about to face the trial of trust. You will prove to the tribe that your place among us is not a mere accident, but a bond forged in honor. Abigail's heart pounded. Trial of trust? She had saved Arik, but that had only been the beginning. She had thought that her role was simple. Protect Arik, live among the tribe. But now, she saw that there was so much more at stake. The woman stepped forward, her presence imposing. She spoke in the Apache language, her words flowing like the river that ran through the valley. Tay translated for Abigail. She says that only those who prove their loyalty to the tribe can remain. There will be no more hiding, no more hesitations. You must face your fears and show that you are worthy of the protection you have been given. The weight of the words hit Abigail hard. This was not just about protecting Arik. It was about proving herself, about earning her place in a world that was still foreign to her. She had no choice now but to step forward, to face whatever trial awaited her. As the woman raised her hand, the warriors fell silent. Chief Cale gave Abigail a long look, his eyes unreadable. Step forward, he said, his voice low but firm. Abigail took a deep breath, her nerves on edge. The trial had begun, and there was no turning back. The moment Abigail stepped forward, the air around her seemed to grow heavier. The weight of what was to come settled into her chest, tightening her breath. Chief Cale's eyes never left her as the woman, the keeper of the ancient ways, stepped back, signaling for her to continue. The warriors circled, their eyes studying her every move, their faces as unreadable as the desert sands. She could feel their judgment, their anticipation. She was not just an outsider anymore. She was part of something, and they wanted to see if she belonged. The woman began to speak again, her voice commanding, though her words were foreign to Abigail. Tay, standing beside her, translated in a voice that barely reached Abigail's ears. To earn your place, you must face the trial of the desert. The desert will test your will, your spirit, and your loyalty. It will show us if you can survive in the world we live in, or if you are just another lost soul who cannot survive our ways. Abigail's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at the woman. Her calm, almost ethereal presence seemed to hold centuries of wisdom and power. It was clear that this woman was not just a healer or a wise elder. She was a force, someone who had seen things Abigail could never imagine. The wind picked up, sending a dust cloud swirling around them. The sky above was darkening, as though in preparation for a storm. Abigail's thoughts raced. She had been through hardships before, living alone in the desert, losing her family, surviving by sheer grit. But this was different. This was more than survival. This was about belonging, about proving herself worthy of a place in a world she had never understood. The trial will begin at dawn. Cale's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood tall, his presence calm and unwavering, but there was a hardness in his eyes. You will be alone. The desert will speak to you. What it says, you must listen. Abigail nodded slowly, her mind still grappling with what was expected of her. She had saved Arik's life, and in doing so, she had been pulled into a world of honor and tradition that she had never known. But now, she was being asked to prove herself in ways she hadn't anticipated. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Cale and the other warriors walked away, leaving Abigail alone in the circle. Tay remained behind, watching her with silent eyes. The desert around her felt vast and endless, its silence almost deafening. She stood there for a long moment, trying to gather her thoughts. What was this trial? What was the desert going to test her on? As she walked back to her cabin, the weight of the coming trial felt like an invisible cloak draped around her shoulders. She had no choice but to face it, whatever it was. That night, Abigail barely slept. The wind howled outside, and the sounds of the desert seemed to creep into her thoughts. She had lived alone for so long that the idea of facing something as ancient and powerful as the desert felt overwhelming. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving her worth, showing that she could endure, that she could belong. The first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls of the cabin. Abigail rose from the bed, feeling the chill of the morning air. She dressed in her simple clothes, gathering the strength she could from the quiet resolve that had kept her alive all these years. She stepped outside, her breath visible in the cool morning air. The desert was still, almost expectant. The horizon seemed to stretch endlessly, the red and orange hues of the rising sun casting long shadows across the land. As she made her way to the edge of the camp, she saw Cale and the warriors waiting. They stood in a line, their faces unreadable, their eyes following her every movement. The keeper of the ancient ways was there, standing apart from the others, her gaze intense. Abigail stopped in front of them, her heart pounding in her chest. The trial begins now, Cale said, his voice low but firm. The warriors stepped aside, making way for her. She glanced at Tay, who nodded slightly, as if reassuring her that this was part of it, part of what she had to face. The desert stretched out before her, wide and barren, the winds whispering through the dry earth. You must walk the desert, Cale continued. You must find your way. The desert will test you, and you must prove that you can survive its trials. Abigail swallowed hard. The desert? She had spent years surviving here, but this was different. This wasn't just about finding water or shelter. This was a test of her spirit. She turned toward the vast expanse before her, the harsh terrain stretching out like an endless sea of sand and rock. The wind swept through her hair as she took her first step. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the weight of the trial was heavy on her shoulders, but Abigail knew one thing. She couldn't turn back. She had made her choice. As she walked into the desert, the silence was broken only by the wind, and her thoughts were the only company she had. The trial had begun, and with each step, she felt the weight of her promise to Cale, to Arik, and to herself, grounding her in the harsh reality of the land she had chosen to belong to. The desert, with all its dangers and beauty, would show her if she was truly worthy of the protection and honor the Apache had offered her. She would face it head-on, as she had done with every challenge before. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that she belonged. Abigail's feet ached as the sun climbed higher, its scorching heat bearing down on her like a relentless force. She had been walking for hours, each step further into the desert, with nothing but the distant horizon to guide her. The wind blew in gusts, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and sage, but it offered no relief from the intense heat. Her water skin, once full, was now nearly empty, and the thought of finding water seemed almost impossible. She had been warned. The desert would test her. She had to endure. Her thoughts wandered back to the night before, when Kale had explained the nature of the trial. The desert, in all its vastness and silence, would show her if she was truly worthy of the tribe's protection. It was not just about survival. It was about proving her spirit, her resolve, and her ability to live by the same laws and customs the Apache followed. The weight of that realization sat heavily on her chest, but she kept walking. The sun burned in the sky, and the shadows of the few sparse trees cast long, distorted shapes on the ground. She knew that she was being watched, though she could not see the eyes on her. Tay had said the tribe would follow her from a distance, making sure she did not falter. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and pressure. The desert's silence was broken only by the occasional sound of shifting sand or the distant call of a bird. There was no escape from the harsh reality of the trial. The land felt alive with something ancient, as though it was judging her every move. She had always known the desert to be unforgiving, but now, she felt as though it was watching her, waiting for her to fail. As the day wore on, her body began to protest. Her throat was dry, and her skin burned from the sun's relentless assault. She had known the desert's dangers, but this felt different. The harshness of the trial was not just the physical toll. It was the mental battle, the loneliness that began to creep in as the hours stretched on. She had never felt so small, so insignificant, in the vastness of the world. She paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from her brow and taking a shallow breath. The thought of turning back crossed her mind, but she quickly pushed it away. Turning back meant failure, and that was not an option. As she continued on, the land began to change. The ground became rockier, and the air grew even hotter, as if the sun itself was pressing down on her with greater intensity. Abigail's legs began to tremble, and her steps slowed. She was losing strength, and the thought of finding shelter or water seemed impossible. But then, in the distance, something caught her eye. A shadow. A figure, standing tall against the horizon. It was too far to make out clearly, but she could feel the pull of it, like a beacon calling her forward. She pushed herself to keep moving, her body protesting every step, but she couldn't stop now. She had to reach that figure. The shadow grew larger as she drew closer, and soon, she could make out the shape of a person standing under the shade of a large rock formation. As she approached, Abigail's heart quickened. She could now see the figure clearly. It was Chief Kale. He stood still, his expression unreadable, watching her with eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "You made it," he said, his voice low and steady. Abigail stopped in front of him, her breath ragged, and her body covered in sweat and dust. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Kale handed her a water skin without a word, and she drank deeply, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. "You are not the first to come this way," Kale continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "Many have walked the desert, only to be lost to it. But you have made it this far. That is a sign of your strength." Abigail lowered the water skin, her hands shaking slightly. "I don't feel strong," she admitted, her voice hoarse. "I feel like I'm losing everything. My strength, my will, even my spirit." Kale studied her for a moment before speaking again. "That is the desert's trial, Abigail. It does not only test your body, it tests your heart, your spirit. The desert strips away what you think you know, leaving only what you truly are." Abigail's eyes met his, and for the first time, she saw something in him, something deeper than the strength he exuded. He had walked this path himself, and somehow, she felt that he understood her struggle in a way no one else could. "You have faced the hardest part of the trial," Kale said. "But the real test comes now. To survive the desert is one thing. To survive among us is another." Abigail felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had thought that surviving the desert would be the ultimate challenge, but Kale's words made her realize that her journey was far from over. The trial had only just begun. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kale stepped closer, his presence both comforting and commanding. "The tribe is not just a people you can live with," he said, his voice firm. "To be one of us, you must understand our ways. You must embrace them as your own. You must walk the path of honor, loyalty, and strength." Abigail nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in. She had always been an outsider, but now, she understood that true belonging required more than just surviving. It required trust. It required commitment. And most of all, it required the courage to face not just the desert, but the people who lived in it, and to prove that she was worthy of the protection and honor they had offered her. "I will do whatever it takes," Abigail said, her voice steady now, filled with a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. Cale nodded once, his expression softening. "Then you are ready for the next part of the trial." The days that followed Cale's words were filled with a kind of quiet intensity. Abigail's every action was now scrutinized by the tribe, and with each passing day, she felt the weight of their expectations grow heavier. The desert had tested her body, but now, it was her heart and spirit that were being tested. She had passed the first part of the trial, but Cale's words haunted her. To survive the desert was one thing. To survive among the Apache was another. She had never truly belonged anywhere. She had spent years alone, learning how to survive on her own. But now, the idea of belonging to something, of being a part of something larger than herself, felt like both a gift and a burden. She spent her days in the camp, performing the duties expected of her. She gathered herbs, helped prepare meals, and tended to Arik, who was recovering well. The bond between them had grown stronger over time, and she found herself thinking of him as a son. Yet, every time she looked around, she saw the eyes of the tribe watching her. They weren't unkind, but there was always that underlying scrutiny. They wanted to see if she would falter. They wanted to see if she was worthy of their protection. One afternoon, as she walked through the camp, she noticed a group of women sitting by the fire, talking in low voices. She recognized them as the wives and daughters of the warriors. They had always kept their distance from her, but today, one of them, an older woman with sharp, calculating eyes, looked up and caught her gaze. "You are Cale's chosen," the woman said, her voice a mixture of curiosity and challenge. "You have survived the desert. But now, you must survive here, with us." Abigail stopped in her tracks, unsure of how to respond. She had expected the tribe to test her, but she hadn't expected the women to be so direct. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "I don't know what you want from me, but I'm trying." The woman nodded slowly, as if assessing Abigail's sincerity. "You're not one of us," she said, her words sharp but not unkind. "But you will be, if you prove yourself. We all have our roles to play. You must find yours." Abigail swallowed, the weight of the woman's words sinking in. She had never been good at fitting in, never been part of a community. She had always been on the outside, surviving on her own terms. But now, things were different. She was part of something that required her to be more than just a survivor. She had to be a protector, a member of the tribe, a woman who contributed to the survival of the whole. The next few days were filled with subtle tests. The women of the tribe began to teach her their ways, how to cook their traditional meals, how to weave baskets, how to care for the children. Abigail worked hard to learn, but each lesson felt like a reminder of how much she still had to prove. She wasn't Apache. She wasn't one of them. But she was trying. And that, at least, seemed to be enough for some of them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the campfire flickered to life, Abigail found herself sitting beside Cale, watching the flames dance in the breeze. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The quiet was comfortable, but it carried a weight. Cale finally broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "You have done well," he said, his gaze never leaving the fire. "The tribe sees you. They are watching, but they are not blind." Abigail's heart fluttered at his words. She had never been good at accepting praise, especially from those she admired. But this felt different. Cale wasn't just saying it to make her feel better. He was acknowledging the effort she had put in, the sacrifices she had made. "I'm not sure I'll ever be one of them," Abigail said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I'm not Apache. I don't know if I can ever truly belong." Cale turned his gaze to her, his eyes soft but intense. "Belonging is not something that can be forced. It is earned. But you are on the right path. You have earned the respect of many here, including me." Abigail looked down at her hands, still unsure of where she stood. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to be a part of something like this. I've always been on my own." Cale placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "Then you will learn," he said simply. "One step at a time. You do not need to be like us. You just need to show us that you are worthy of the trust we have placed in you." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Abigail felt a small spark of hope. Maybe she could belong. Maybe, in time, she could find her place. As the fire crackled between them, she realized that this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, about finding a new purpose, a new family, in a world that had once felt so empty. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe that was enough. The next few days brought an unexpected shift for Abigail. She had always been a woman of solitude, but now, she found herself waking up each morning to the sounds of life around her. Children laughing, the rhythmic pounding of stone against wood as the warriors prepared their weapons, the faint smell of cooking over the fire. The Apache camp had become her world, and though she still felt the weight of being an outsider, the bonds she had begun to form made the idea of leaving seem impossible. The trials she had faced in the desert had changed something in her. She was no longer just a woman trying to survive. She had learned that survival alone was not enough. It was about community, about belonging, and about giving herself fully to something greater than her own fears. Kale had been right. She was on the path to earning her place, but it wasn't going to be easy. The tribe had accepted her in ways she had never imagined. But that acceptance came with responsibilities, expectations, and tests that would continue for the foreseeable future. Every day, she proved herself in small ways. She worked alongside the women, learning their ways of weaving, cooking, and caring for the camp. She spent hours with Arik, teaching him how to write the letters she had learned in her youth, though he was still hesitant to speak to her in more than a few words. His silence was not from fear, but from his own wariness. He was still processing everything that had happened to him, and Abigail understood that. One evening, after a long day of work, she sat by the fire, her hands weary from the work of the day. The fire crackled in front of her, and the warriors sat around her, their faces reflecting the warm glow of the flames. Kale was among them, his gaze resting on her as he sat silently. The quiet of the night was comforting, but as the flames flickered, she felt a nagging sense of uncertainty. Despite the progress she had made, she still felt like she was walking a fine line between acceptance and rejection. "How do you know when you truly belong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale turned his head toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though he was considering her question. The others remained silent, their attention turning toward her. "Belonging is not something that happens overnight," he said after a moment. "It takes time. It takes effort. But most of all, it takes trust. Trust in the people around you, and trust in yourself." Abigail looked at him, her mind racing. Trust. She had spent most of her life guarding herself against trust, never fully opening herself to anyone for fear of being hurt. But here, in this desert, in this camp, she was being asked to trust in a way she never had before. It was not just about her survival. It was about her place in the tribe, her commitment to them. "And what if I fail?" she asked quietly, the fear of failure creeping into her voice. Kale looked at her steadily, his gaze unwavering. "Failure is part of the journey," he said. "It is how we learn. It is how we grow. To be part of this tribe is not about being perfect. It is about being real. We do not hide from our mistakes. We learn from them, and we move forward." His words resonated deeply within her. For so long, Abigail had lived in fear of failure, thinking that one mistake would lead to her downfall. But Kale's words gave her a new perspective. Perhaps failure wasn't something to be feared. Perhaps it was simply a part of the process of becoming who she was meant to be. The conversation shifted then, and the warriors began to share stories of their past, tales of battles won and lost, of the hardships they had faced and overcome. Abigail listened intently, absorbing the strength and resilience that echoed through each story. These were people who had known pain, who had known loss, and yet they stood here, together, a family bound not by blood but by shared experience and respect. As the fire burned low, Kale stood and walked over to Abigail. His presence was imposing, yet comforting. "Tomorrow, we ride," he said simply. "There is a hunt to be made. The tribe needs food, and we must provide." Abigail nodded, understanding that this was another test, another opportunity to prove herself. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she wasn't about to back down. The next day, they rode out as a group, Abigail now fully integrated into their routine. She had been on horseback before, but this felt different. She was no longer just an outsider. She was part of something, part of this tribe. They traveled for hours, across the dry, rocky landscape, until they reached a clearing where the animals they hunted gathered. The warriors moved with practiced precision, each knowing their role, each working together as a unit. Abigail watched, taking in the fluidity of their movements, the strength in their unity. When it was her turn, she followed their lead, guiding her horse into position with the rest of the group. The hunt was fast and efficient, and Abigail found herself caught up in the excitement, her heart pounding with the thrill of the chase. They returned to the camp later that day with their spoils, the hunt having been a success. As they dismounted, Cale came over to her, his eyes glowing with approval. "You did well," he said, his voice low but filled with pride. "You are becoming one of us." Abigail felt a warmth spread through her at his words. She had taken another step forward, proving herself not only to the tribe but to herself. She wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. This was where she was meant to be. The Apache had accepted her, and now, she was ready to fully accept them in return. As the days stretched into weeks, Abigail began to feel a shift in the way the tribe saw her. No longer was she the outsider, the woman, who had come out of nowhere. She had earned her place. The bond she shared with Arik had deepened, and Cale had continued to show his quiet approval, his leadership not just felt in his words, but in his actions. He trusted her now, and in turn, she trusted him, though in her heart, she still wondered if she could ever truly belong. But there was no time to dwell on such thoughts. The Apache were a people of action, and each day brought with it new challenges and responsibilities. One morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of purple and orange, Cale called for a meeting. Abigail had been readying herself for another day of work when she heard his voice echo through the camp. "Abigail," he called. "Come, we ride." His words were simple, yet there was urgency in his tone. As she made her way toward him, she noticed the other warriors gathering, their faces serious. Cale, standing tall as ever, did not wait for her to speak. "A group of settlers has wandered too close to our lands," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They are causing trouble. It is time we address it." The words sent a ripple through the camp. The Apache had long fought for their land, for their freedom, and any encroachment was seen as an act of aggression. Abigail felt the weight of Cale's words sink in. This wasn't just a routine task. It was a call to protect everything they had fought for. She had seen how the Apache dealt with threats before. The warriors were skilled and swift, moving like a single unit. Abigail, despite her new role, felt the tension in the air. This was different from the hunt. This was about defending their way of life. As they mounted their horses, Abigail joined the group. She had ridden with them many times, but this time felt different. The urgency in Cale's voice was not lost on her. The settlers, who had crossed onto Apache land, were a threat. They were trespassing in a way that could not be ignored. They were not just intruders, they were enemies. The ride took them through rocky terrain, the horses' hooves pounding against the earth as they sped toward the boundary where the settlers had set up camp. The closer they got, the more Abigail could feel the tension rising. This was not the peaceful land she had come to know. It was a place of danger, of territorial pride. The settlers had no idea what they had provoked. As they reached the outskirts of the settlers' camp, Cale signaled for them to stop. The camp was nestled near a small creek, and Abigail could see several figures moving about, unaware of the approaching Apache warriors. Cale turned to Abigail, his expression unreadable. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice calm but firm. "Do not interfere unless I call for you." Abigail nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had grown accustomed to the Apache's ways, but this was different. This was a reminder that in this world, survival wasn't just about what you did for the tribe. It was about how you defended it. She stayed hidden among the trees, watching as Cale and the warriors moved silently into position. The settlers, oblivious to the threat, continued with their work, their voices carried on the wind. Abigail could feel the weight of the moment, the silence before the storm. It was a strange thing, to be part of something so much larger than herself. The Apache had become her family, and she had sworn to protect them, to stand beside them. But this was war. She wasn't sure what would happen next. Would the settlers be allowed to leave, or would they face the wrath of the Apache? It was a question that hung in the air as Kale gave the signal to move. The warriors charged with lightning speed, their presence like a wave crashing against the shore. The settlers, now aware of the danger, scrambled to defend themselves, but they were no match for the Apache warriors. The confrontation was swift and decisive. Abigail could hear the shouts and cries, the clash of metal against metal, but she remained still, watching as the Apache dealt with the threat. It was a reminder of the strength and power that came with their way of life. After a few tense moments, the conflict was over. The settlers were disarmed, their camp destroyed, but no lives were lost. Kale and the warriors stood over them, their eyes filled with the calm satisfaction of a task completed. Abigail's heart was still racing as Kale approached her. His expression was still serious, but there was something else there, pride. "You stayed," he said, his voice low. "You understand now what it means to protect, to fight for what is ours." Abigail nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully understood. She had seen the Apache fight, but this was different. It was not just about the land. It was about their history, their people, and their way of life. "I do," she said quietly. "I understand." Kale's gaze softened slightly, though his eyes remained as intense as ever. "Good. Because this is only the beginning." Abigail felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She had found her place, not just among the tribe, but in this world. She was not just an outsider anymore. She was an Apache, bound by honor and loyalty, and there was nothing she wouldn't do to protect the people she now called family. As they rode back to the camp, Abigail felt a strange sense of peace settle within her. The journey she had started was far from over, but now, she was ready for whatever lay ahead. The days after the confrontation with the settlers passed quickly, but the feeling of unrest in Abigail's chest did not fade. Kale had given her a task, a responsibility, and though she had faced the trial and proven herself, she now understood that her place in the tribe was not guaranteed. It would always be earned, day by day, with every decision, every action, and every moment of loyalty. Abigail spent the next few weeks adjusting to her new life, learning the ways of the Apache with more intensity than before. Every task was a test, every glance from a tribal member a reminder that she was still on probation, still trying to prove that she belonged. She found herself growing closer to Arik, who had started to speak more, though he still carried the silence of someone who had seen too much. Despite his reserved nature, Abigail could feel the bond between them strengthen. He was no longer just the boy she had saved from the desert. He had become her family. Her place among the tribe began to feel more solidified, but it was during a quiet evening that she would face the true test of her commitment. Kale had summoned her to meet with him, and she knew that it was not for a casual conversation. She made her way to the gathering place, the fire flickering. In the distance, as she approached, she saw Kale standing with a few of the senior warriors. His expression was grim, and the air around him felt heavy. "You've done well," Kale said when he saw her approach, his voice steady but filled with an undertone of something more serious. "But there is another matter we must address." Abigail's heart skipped a beat. She had expected a quiet evening, not a confrontation. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady, though she couldn't hide the tension in her chest. Kale looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. "There are whispers in the tribe," he said. "Some of the elders believe that your presence here is a distraction, that you are not truly one of us." The word stung, but Abigail didn't show it. She had expected something like this, but it still hurt to hear. "I have done everything I can," she said, her voice a little softer than she intended. "I have proven myself through my actions." Kale nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "That is true," he said, "but some still doubt. They do not see you as an equal. They see you as a stranger, an outsider." The weight of his words settled heavily in the pit of Abigail's stomach. She had worked so hard to earn her place, to show them that she was more than just a woman from a distant land. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with determination. Kale's eyes softened. "There is one way to prove your loyalty to the tribe, once and for all," he said. "The elders have decided that you must undergo a final trial, a test not just of your strength, but of your spirit. You will face the sacred mountain alone." Abigail's breath caught. The sacred mountain. It was a place of deep significance to the Apache, a place where only those deemed worthy were allowed to go. It was said to be a place where the spirits of the land tested those who sought their favor. No one who had entered had come back the same. Alone? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, Kale replied. You will climb to the top of the mountain and return. But there is more. You will not know what awaits you. The mountain will test you in ways you cannot prepare for. Abigail's mind raced. She had been in the desert, had faced hunger and heat, had fought for survival. But this was different. This was more than just physical endurance. This was about proving her spirit, her heart, and her resolve. I understand, she said finally, her voice steady, though the doubt in her heart was hard to ignore. Kale nodded, his expression serious. The trial will be tomorrow. You must go at dawn. It is the only way to earn the respect of the tribe completely. The weight of his words settled in her chest. She had come so far, but now she was being asked to prove herself in a way she had never imagined. The following morning, Abigail stood before the sacred mountain, the first light of dawn casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. She could see the peak rising high above her, a jagged silhouette against the sky. The path up the mountain was steep, treacherous, and surrounded by an eerie silence. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air against her skin, and began to climb. The rocks were sharp and uneven, and every step required careful footing. Her muscles ached from the exertion, but she pressed on, her eyes focused on the peak above her. As she climbed higher, the air thinned, and the wind began to howl, pushing against her with a force that made her stumble. But still, she kept going. The mountain was testing her, not just her body, but her will. As she reached higher, the path became even more difficult. The rocks grew more jagged, and the footing less stable. The wind howled louder, threatening to push her off balance. The higher she climbed, the more the mountain seemed to fight back. Yet, despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her, Abigail found a strange sense of peace. The mountain was testing her resolve, pushing her to her limits, but with every step, she felt herself becoming stronger, more determined. She was not just climbing a mountain. She was climbing toward something greater, toward a place where she could prove not only her physical strength, but her spirit. The peak seemed so far away, but Abigail pushed on, knowing that with every step, she was one step closer to her place in the tribe. The climb to the peak felt endless, but Abigail's body had found a rhythm that matched the harsh terrain. The wind howled around her, buffeting her face with the sting of sand and dust. Her muscles burned with the effort, but with each step, she felt herself getting closer, not just to the top of the mountain, but to a place of understanding, a place where she could prove not only to the tribe, but to herself that she truly belonged. The rocky surface beneath her feet was treacherous, and her hands scraped against the jagged rocks as she pulled herself higher. The air grew thinner as she ascended, and her breath came in sharp gasps. But there was something else, something more profound that kept her moving. It was the belief that she was not just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for her place in a world she had once thought was beyond her reach. As she neared the summit, the wind grew fiercer, and the clouds above darkened ominously, threatening a storm. But Abigail didn't stop. Her determination had taken root long before the mountain had become an obstacle. She had faced the desert's trial, survived among the Apache, and now, as the final test loomed before her, she knew that she had to face it with everything she had left. With a final burst of energy, Abigail pulled herself up to the peak. The world stretched out before her, the vast desert below, the mountains beyond, the endless sky above. For a moment, she simply stood there, feeling the power of the land surge through her, the silence of the mountains surrounding her like a thick blanket. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind, to the desert, to the very earth beneath her feet. And in that silence, she realized something profound. The desert had not just been a test of her strength or endurance. It had been a test of her spirit. The trials she had faced had shown her the depths of her own resilience. But this moment, was about something more. It was about understanding that true strength came from knowing who she was and where she belonged. The winds shifted as the storm approached, but Abigail didn't move. She stood on that peak, feeling the storm begin to break around her. The rain started slowly, at first just a drizzle, then a heavy downpour. But it didn't matter. Abigail felt no fear. The Storm was not a challenge to overcome. It was part of the journey. As the rain soaked her to the bone, she let it wash over her, feeling it cleanse her, feeling it mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. She was no longer just a woman from a distant land. She was part of this world, this tribe, and she was ready to face whatever came next. She turned and began her descent, her mind clearer than it had ever been. When she reached the base of the mountain, Kale was waiting for her. He stood with his warriors, his eyes calm, but there was a faint smile on his lips. "You have done it," he said simply. Abigail nodded, the weight of the journey still heavy in her chest, but her heart was light. She had climbed the sacred mountain, and she had proven herself. But more importantly, she had come to understand that her place in the Apache world was not just given. It was earned through every choice, every step, and every challenge she had faced. The tribe surrounded her, their faces filled with approval, respect, and even warmth. In that moment, Abigail felt something she had never experienced before, true belonging. She had been tested, yes, but she had passed. And now, she was part of something far greater than herself. As Kale stepped forward, his expression soft, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have earned your place," he said. "You are one of us." The words, spoken simply but with such deep meaning, filled Abigail with a sense of peace she had never known. She had found her home. It was not in the solitude she had once known, but in the community she had fought to be a part of. The storm that had raged on the mountain had passed, and in its wake, a new beginning awaited her. Abigail Hawthorne was no longer an outsider. She was Apache, and this was her family. Experienced the power and emotion of a remarkable journey in the world of Western stories. Follow Abigail Hawthorne, a woman who finds herself caught between her past and a new life with the Apache tribe. From surviving the harsh desert to earning her place among a people she never expected to belong to, Abigail's story is a testament to courage, loyalty, and personal transformation. In this captivating tale, the challenges of the desert and the unspoken trials of trust will reveal not only her strength, but her deepening bond with the Apache. As Abigail proves herself in the face of adversity, this epic of Western stories brings forth themes of survival, honor, and the relentless pursuit of belonging. Through every trial, Abigail learns that her place in the tribe is not just about what she can endure, but the way she gives herself to something greater than herself. This chapter in the world of Western stories is more than just a battle for survival. It is the story of a woman who learns what it means to fight not just for life, but for family. Join Abigail on her journey through the rugged landscape and the fierce tests of loyalty, where every decision she makes will shape her destiny. Immerse yourself in a world where every challenge has its price, and where belonging is earned through unwavering resolve. These Western stories will not only transport you to another time and place, but also remind you of the strength it takes to carve a life out of the toughest circumstances. Discover the spirit of the American frontier as you follow Abigail's path toward understanding, acceptance, and a new sense of home, woven seamlessly into the fabric of the Apache way of life.